Hello, fellow participants. I'm so happy to be here at the Science for Consciousness meeting organized by Stuart Hameroff and others. And today I'm going to make a presentation on the conscious matrix, our portal to the universal truth and connection. And I hope that by the end of my presentation you'll have a little bit of a better idea what I mean by that. In the next slide, I show you a little bit of background about myself. My name is Nancy Woolf. I was at UCLA for over 30 years. I had the great opportunity to work with some of the brightest and most brilliant minds in the world. And I know many of you participants are here today, are among that group. Since I retired 8 years ago, I've done a number of things, most notably working on this book that I'm going to be talking about today, Conscious Matrix, Our Portal to God. And I'm going to take a really bold step, and I'm going to try to forge a bridge between science and religion. And consciousness, and in particular quantum mind theory, is a perfect vehicle for this. The conscious matrix, what is it? Well, actually it's neural architecture, and that was what my scientific background really delved into. We looked at chemical neuroanatomy. Essentially, the neurotransmitters, the way that they're organized in the brain, and then at one point in my career we turned to Alzheimer's disease because acetylcholine is known to be depleted in Alzheimer's. What clicked in my brain was that microtubules might be mediated by acetylcholine in some way. And I knew from my background that microtubules were very important for neuroplasticity. In fact, they might be the vehicle, the main driver of neuroplasticity. One of my earliest papers that I did after learning about quantum mind theory is an analysis of the different dendrites that are found throughout the cerebral cortex. And as many of you in the audience know, the cerebral cortex is divided into primary areas, secondary areas, and then higher association areas. And as we ascend in this hierarchy, the dendrite arbors become more and more elaborate. And it clicked in my mind that we might have the coherent activity, and at that time I was thinking more on the lines of an electromagnetic field, where you'd have coherent activity of, say, parallel dendrite branches throughout one cortical module. And then perhaps in a distant cortical module, you'd have resonance with another group of dendrites. And as you ascend, these dendrites would become more and more distally located. Many of you in the audience know what I'm talking about. In the next slide, I want to ask the really important question. And this is where quantum mind theorists and traditional neuroscientists really part company. We know that the traditional neuroscience view is that synaptic connections are what's important for all cognitive activity and also for learning and memory. But when we evaluate closely, what can synaptic connections really do? We see that all that they can do is display, like a video monitor, series upon series of data screens. Whereas if we look to quantum brain theory and we look at quantum entanglement that might occur among electrons or that might travel along various cytoarchitectural features aided by photons, that then we can start talking about not just pulling up data screens, but actually interpreting and understanding the meaning and the patterns that are continuously bombarding our sensory systems. In the next slide, let me take just a brief sip of water. I just want to compare and contrast the differences between neural network models and quantum mind theory. Well, as most of you know, neural network models are based on neurons, and we have billions of them. And then we have trillions of synapses. And for higher cognitive activity, we're really talking mostly about activity in the cerebral cortex, the outer mantle. Not that some deep subcortical structures don't play important roles as well. And a very important principle is that these structures are hierarchically organized. And I mentioned that a little earlier. We have primary sensory cortex and secondary areas, and then finally higher association areas. But still, just putting together these maps, is that enough? And many of us think not. We think that we need quantum mind theory. And quantum mind theory goes a step further and a step deeper, much deeper, inside of the cells, where we find an abundance of microtubules, these long filaments. And any of you who have participated in one of Stuart's meetings, you know all about microtubules. They're kind of our favorite part of the inside of the neuron. And the way that microtubules are organized gives them the opportunity to have perfectly spaced electrons that can entangle. And it's a hard thing to prove because many people have questioned the veracity or the validity of quantum mind theory. How can you prove something, such a delicate state, can actually exist inside the human brain? Well, I'll get to that a little later, and I'm sure other speakers in this fabulous meeting will really hammer that out. Superposition is another important feature that we have in quantum mind theory, that we have nothing like that in traditional neural networks. And then finally there's reduction, or collapse, of these superposition states. And again, I'd refer you to the Hameroff and Penrose model that goes into a lot of detail about that. In the next slide, I wanted to just show a paper that Stuart and I wrote in 2001. I had the great pleasure of meeting Stuart in and around 2000, and we wrote a couple of papers right away. And many of you will be familiar with Stuart's famous model of the microtubule with the tubulins arranged such that the electrons can be in one of two positions, either up, the dipole can be directed up, or it can be directed down. But what's so cool about superposition is that the electrons can be both up and down at the same time, kind of like when you're in a state of uncertainty. Can't make up your mind. Do I want to go right? Do I want to go left? My role in this was to try to relate quantum mind theory and that kind of quantum level computation, at least at the theoretical level, with what we knew in basic neuroscience. So my expertise was in acetylcholine, and what we tied together is that acetylcholine, when it binds to the receptor and then acts through signal transduction molecules, might undergo something like precipitating a transition, like from a sol state to a gel state, whereby the actin filaments would actually provide, kind of like insulation on a wire, a protection over these microtubules, thereby protecting any delicate quantum states. And in the next slide, I want to just take this a couple of steps further. Step one. This is what people in quantum mind theory have been working on now for, oh my goodness, 20 plus years, many years, working on how could quantum entanglement within the bony encased skull, how could that enable these locations, multiple locations, widespread throughout the brain, to entangle with zero time lag such that it precipitates a thought. A human thought like, aha, I finally get the answer. Or a human thought like, yes, that's the word I was looking for. That's a lot of work right there. Okay, now, I'm a retired person, so I can work on any problem I want right now, and I want to take it this next step. Can we at least find some rudimentary evidence that we can make quantum entanglements from our brain to that of another person or to the universe at large? And that's what I'm going to talk about next. And I'll let you give me some feedback at the end. You can send me an email. You can make comments whether you think this direction has some merit. In the next slide, I'm starting with the simple case, the top one. how can quantum entanglements between locations in our brain result in an interpretive, aha, that's what I was thinking of. And I do this, I map this, because for me, I'm a visually oriented person, so if I can see it in my mind, then I think I can start testing whether that's real or not. So every time we hear or read the word ball, lots of things are going on. For example, we might read the word ball, and there are certain horizontal and certain vertical lines that make up those individual letters. We put those all together. The neuroscience behind how we do this is relatively well understood. Researchers know how we read, basically. It's pretty straightforward, putting the pieces of visual information together, whether it's the word ball or an actual ball. When we hear the word ball, same thing. The phonemes, how they're represented in the brain, that's pretty well understood. Modern neuroscience has a handle on that. And these things are occurring in the visual cortex or in the auditory cortex, both primary sensory areas. But how do we use the word ball? When we hear it, we know immediately. That's something we can play with. That's something we can hit, we can throw, we can drop the ball. All of those concepts, and that's a concept. When we have a noun-verb pair, we're talking about a concept, not just a simple concrete object. Those things are put together in secondary and higher association cortex. And then finally, we have the intended direction of our actions. Do we want to hit the ball? Here, there, up, down. We can imagine the future. When that batter hits the ball, he wants to hit it out. He wants to hit a home run. We can imagine the future because we put together the same kind of things that we put together in primary visual cortex. We put them together in prefrontal cortex, where we can imagine things that have yet to happen. So in the next slide, I show a little bit, and this was published in our book, Nano Neuroscience, and I did this book with Jack Tuschinski, who's another participant in the meeting. Hi, Jack. And Avner Priel, an excellent scientist from Israel. So we put together this idea, and I think it's very intriguing. Classical neuroscience now supposes that we pair learning by a potentiated response at spine 1 with potentiated responses at some other place, like spine 2. However, I think that there's a real problem with this, because the spines are where the nerve cells are receiving inputs. If you have a radio receiver, you don't want to store a particular message in your receiver. No, that has to be open and naive, and that has to be unbiased to receive a new message. You would probably put it on some recording tape or some kind of storage device. So these microtubules, and they're represented here as the lines, and then the cross bridges are things like the microtubule-associated proteins like MAP2 that we looked at extensively in the laboratory. This could be a memory that stores a temporal association between activation at spine 1 and activation at spine 2. So not only is the conscious matrix, and again, I'm defining the conscious matrix here as the network of microtubules found in every neuron and the possible entanglements that they can make with other microtubules. And remember, all this is via electrons in either the up or down or superposition states being entangled with other electrons. So in the next slide, I start to really probe the question, is it possible that we can have a quantum entanglement, not just within our own minds? People who are adherents to quantum mind theory are pretty convinced, we're pretty enthusiastic as a group, we're pretty convinced that the quantum mind theory works better than classical neuroscience. But can it actually connect us to things outside of ourselves? How about person-to-person connection? Is there any evidence that that has anything whatsoever to do with a quantum entanglement? Well, there's a small amount of evidence. When two people understand something at the same time, there's a brief entanglement, or at least there's synchronicity. And researchers have shown this with storytelling. When someone tells a story repeatedly to a group, they all start to synchronize their brain activity. The only problem is that there's a time lag. Usually the storyteller's brain activity goes a little bit ahead in time and then is followed by the group or someone in the group's, their brain activity. But if two people are very close, let's say a very close friendship or even a loved one, and they share these kind of shared aha moments with eye contact, such that it can be time-linked, there's a real possibility that there might be very brief quantum entanglements, real quantum entanglements between two people. Can't prove that, but it's just a possibility that certainly warrants more scientific investigation. Now, how about a person to a higher power connection? Now, you might say, hey, Nancy, that's really wild, you know. Person-to-person quantum entanglement, I don't buy it, but maybe. Listen to this. It's actually easier to make a case for person-to-higher power quantum connections than it is for person-to-person, and I'll tell you why. We cannot continue to view our brains as being isolated and without any influence from outside physical forces. In fact, not that many years ago, there was the discovery of the God particle, or what we might call the Higgs boson. I'm sure many of you in the audience know all about the Higgs boson. But like the Higgs boson, and then that's an important particle that is involved in turning pure energy into mass, there's something called the Higgs field. And the Higgs field can just pass through matter without any problem, just like an X-ray can pass through our bodies without any problem. It's not held back by the bony skull. So, how is it that we get our minds in the first place? Many of us know that there are templates. We have the connectome, and that's all of the connections in the human living brain, all the functional connections. But where do the templates come from to organize information in the hierarchies? All that we see in brain tissue are neurons. We don't see the hierarchy. Well, I'm going to hypothesize, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to hypothesize that this hierarchy is based into something that's omnipresent and ubiquitous, something like the Higgs field. And it could be a template for resonance, coherence, and maybe the moral good, and something like black holes could be seen as detractors that take us away from the moral good, but we're always, the strongest detractor is going to be this huge force field that's always going to pull us back in, because the mind is wired to return to that good, omnipresent, and all-powerful force field. And in the next slide, I set this up in my latest book, Conscious Matrix, Our Portal to God. I set this up according to the scientific method. These are the same steps you use to analyze any problem according to the scientific method. So what's the first thing you observe? Billions of people across the globe, across the world, believe in God. Different ways, but they all have this belief. In fact, out of the nearly 8 billion people in the world, something like nearly 7 billion people either believe in God, pray, or are spiritual people. So the hypothesis is, and it's a very low-level, stick-to-the-facts hypothesis, yes, belief in God is real. We can see that. Billions of people believe in God. But that could also mean that God is the highest concept in mind. So, the predictions are that when science explains how the mind works, it will explain whether God is real or not. We can test this if we test it with neural networks models that view the brain and the mind mechanistically, then God is an illusion. It's just a figment of our imagination, or he's just a figment of our imagination. But if we adhere to quantum mind theory, then we see the human mind as connected on a deeper level to the deepest structure of the universe, and then we see God is real. So in the next slide, and I have to speed it up, science can no longer ignore the fact that faith has amazing healing properties, and that is a real outcome. We've repeatedly seen that faith and prayer decrease stress. They have mild but real effects on blood pressure, high blood pressure, and other diseases, cancer. And even recently with the COVID-19 has shown that more than half of people have prayed for an end to this horrible, horrible virus. And of the 86% of all Americans who pray daily, they prayed for this, as well as many as 15% of people who rarely or seldom pray. And this brings us to future directions. How can we continue to examine this important problem? And one is to take religious belief more seriously. Science has long ignored the wealth of data on how the human mind comprehends data, or comprehends God, excuse me. How children develop their concept of God mimics the development of religious thought and theology throughout the ages, and there's just a lot of data there, a lot of data, 5 millennia of data on how the human mind not only explains God, but how it experiences God. We actually experience God, and that's something that only quantum mind theory hits. So, and if you're interested in this topic, you can buy my book. It's available on, I published it with Liberty Hill, and it's available on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Alexander Aris, and my talk today is a non-computable level 4 multiverse, universal consciousness, and the living cosmos. I thought I'd begin by saying a little bit about myself, especially because some of the themes that I'll be talking about have been quite bound up with my own personal trajectory. My talk today is a conversation between the thought of 3 thinkers, the leading mathematical physicists, Roger Penrose and Max Tegmark, and Arnold Mindell, who is the founder of process-oriented psychology and also originally trained as a scientist. I first came across the thought of Roger Penrose actually at a time when I had dropped out of college for a bit, and I was partly searching for a new direction, and his book, The Emperor's New Mind, came into my life, and I was very struck and inspired by it, and especially his thesis of the non-computability of conscious thought. And that was actually part of my inspiration and motivation to go back to college and get first an undergraduate degree in philosophy and then a master's in mathematics. And I actually envisioned going on and having something of an academic career, at least for a time, and doing a PhD in mathematics. However, after my master's, I took a year out and I never went back. I did, however, continue to investigate the nature of consciousness, partly through committed meditation practice and meditation retreat and exploration of varieties of non-ordinary states of consciousness. At some point, however, I did find myself back in a formal degree program at an unusual school called the Process Work Institute in Portland, Oregon. And I studied for a master's, which I completed in process-oriented psychology, and trained as a therapist and facilitator. And also, I wrote my master's thesis on Mindell's magnum opus, Quantum Mind, the Edge Between Physics and Psychology, in which he endeavors to bring together physics and psychology into a kind of unified universal science of psychophysics. And it was while I was working on my thesis that I discovered the work of Max Tegmark and his mathematical universe hypothesis and concept of mathematical democracy. And I was very struck by that and by the way it resonated with some of Arne Mundell's thinking in quantum mind. So my talk today really brings together these three thinkers in a way that synthesizes their thought in ways that I think are interesting and have, I think, actually remarkable consequences. So I'm going to talk first about Roger Penrose's thesis on the non-computability of conscious thought. And Penrose's thesis is really founded on two pillars: the mathematical philosophy of Platonism and a certain deployment of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which is a fundamental result of mathematical logic. Now, Platonism is a philosophy of mathematics that posits a timeless, objective realm of mathematical reality, which is independent of the human mind, but can nevertheless be known by the human mind. And this is a universe essentially of mathematical archetypes, including numbers, all different number systems, geometric forms and figures, abstract spaces, algebraic structures. In fact, any and all mathematical entities, which for a Platonist like Penrose have an independent, timeless existence. And for Penrose also, the physical universe is a mathematical structure. It's a substructure of the mathematical universe as a whole. So not all of the mathematical universe is part of the physical universe, but the physical universe is, Penrose, entirely a mathematical structure. Now, Gödel's theorem, at least in the form that basically Penrose deploys it, states something approximately like that within any sufficiently powerful mathematical theory, there are undecidable propositions that cannot even in principle be proved or disproved by computation. This is actually the subject of a master's thesis that I wrote in mathematics. And so for Penrose, the fact that there are these computationally undecidable propositions ultimately illustrates the fact that the human mind is not simply a computer made of meat. Because for him, there is still, as a Platonist, some objective truth of the matter of whether or not these propositions that a computer can neither prove nor disprove are actually true. And he goes into some length to argue that human mathematicians can nevertheless establish the truth or falsity of these propositions through conscious mathematical intuition in ways that computers can't. And in fact, a genuine understanding of even simple mathematics cannot be programmed into a computer. Even a structure as simple as the counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. The actual formal theory of counting numbers is incomplete and contains propositions that can't be proved or disproved by computation. And so that makes even something like the counting numbers essentially an uncomputable structure. And so Penrose's conclusion is that conscious mathematical thought, and in fact all conscious thought, cannot be reduced to computational principles, and that the brain and the physical universe, in fact, must operate according to currently largely unknown non-computable laws of much expanded quantum physics. And although Penrose's thesis remains controversial, I essentially sign on to the view that undecidability and incompleteness in mathematics do illustrate the fact that conscious thought is not computable, and consciousness cannot be reduced to computable principles. I do think, though, that part of the challenge for physicists is to actually come up with this much expanded quantum physics that Penrose postulates, and actually show how this new quantum physics would actually be sufficient to explain the workings of the conscious mind and brain. I'm going to talk more now about Max Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis. And as Tegmark puts this succinctly, states that mathematical existence equals physical existence. And whereas for Penrose, the entire mathematical universe is not the physical universe. The physical universe is not the mathematical universe in its entirety, it's just a substructure. Whereas for Tegmark, the entire mathematical universe is physical. That's what he means by mathematical existence equals physical existence. And he means it in a certain sense. Now, his thesis is founded on two ideas: the external reality hypothesis and something he calls mathematical democracy. The external reality hypothesis holds that there is an external physical reality that's independent of any internal reality of human beings, animals, aliens, what have you. And for Tegmark, this external reality must be a mathematical structure, a purely mathematical structure, because only a mathematical structure can be completely independent of any internal reality. In other words, something like only a mathematical structure can be completely objective and uncolored by subjectivity, or as Tegmark puts it, free of human baggage. Now, the second pillar of the mathematical universe hypothesis is this idea of mathematical democracy, that it would be arbitrary and unscientific to exclude any mathematical structure at all from physical reality. What reason would there be to disinclude anybody, as it were? And so for Tegmark, the ultimate physical reality is what he calls the level 4 multiverse. He has 4 levels of multiverse. The first is multiverse of universes in which the laws of physics are the same as our own, but the initial conditions are different, so they have different histories. The second level is a multiverse of universes where some of them have laws of physics which are different from ours. The third level is the multiverse of many worlds interpretations of quantum physics. And the level 4 multiverse is this multiverse of all mathematical structures whatsoever. Now, and so in our particular universe, I should make clear, not all mathematical structures exist, but in the level 4 multiverse, all mathematical structures are physically real. Now, I'm going to say that I accept the mathematical universe hypothesis and the basic intuition behind the principle of mathematical democracy, which I think is a profound one related to the philosophy of modal realism, which I personally take very seriously. However, I do think that the external reality hypothesis needs to be revised, but I do believe this can be carried out in a way that still allows the mathematical universe hypothesis to go through. Going into the details of that would be a whole nother presentation in itself. But suffice to say for now that I do actually subscribe to the basic principle of the mathematical universe hypothesis that Tegmark proposes. Now, in addition to Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis, he has a computable universe hypothesis. And as he actually explicitly states, this is in a sense the exact opposite of Penrose's non-computability of conscious thought thesis. So the computable universe hypothesis holds that the physical universe is entirely defined by computable functions. And by the physical universe, that means all the way up to the level 4 multiverse. And so I think this is highly problematic. And so the first problem with the computable universe hypothesis is that we know by Gödel's theorem that even fragments of the mathematical universe can't be fully defined computably, still less the entire mathematical universe. So it's very strange. If even fragments can't be computable, how could the whole thing be computable? And to me, that suggests that the mathematical universe hypothesis actually refutes the computable universe hypothesis. And so Tegmark sort of he recognizes this problem, and his main argument against it is that if the universe were not computable, it could not be defined unambiguously in a mathematically intelligible way, and therefore somehow non-computable mathematics is an illusion, and somehow the physical universe only consists of computable mathematical structures. Well, that's really a very strange conclusion. And it's certainly contrary to mathematical intuition of working mathematicians and to their mathematical practice, which investigates all sorts of mathematical structures, certainly including non-computable ones. And to say that somehow that mathematics with which those mathematicians are engaged in is somehow illusory and not real is extremely odd and I think unsatisfactory. And this also flies in the face, I think, of Tegmark's conception of mathematical democracy and not wanting to exclude any mathematical structure at all from reality. And furthermore, I actually think that the problem of mathematical intelligibility that Tegmark raises can actually be solved by the non-computability of conscious thought thesis, which holds that mathematical understanding is not computable in the first place. We don't understand mathematics in computational terms, ultimately. And so even if we think that it's necessary that the physical universe be fully mathematically intelligible, the non-computability of conscious thought still offers at least potentially a way out. And so interestingly, I think that the mathematical universe hypothesis actually strengthens the case for the non-computability of conscious thought. And so the conclusion is that I draw is that we live in a non-computable level 4 multiverse. And this is, of course, a synthesis of Penrose and Tegmark's view, their views, which Tegmark actually regards as incompatible. And I think this is actually a very interesting synthesis. The consequences are very interesting to me. And I think the implications are actually quite striking. So for some hints as to what some of the implications of a non-computable mathematical universe might be, I'm going to talk a little bit about Arnold Mendel's work and his conception of quantum mind in his book of that name. He explicitly cites Penrose multiple times in Quantum Mind. And Mendel's own discussion of Gödel's theorem is certainly very much consistent with Penrose's view that it offers evidence that conscious thought is not computable. And then in the later sequel to Quantum Mind, Mendel actually specifically mentions Tegmark and the similarities between their thought, especially Tegmark's conception of mathematical democracy. And so for Mendel, mathematics is not only a theory of physical reality, but a universal archetypal and transpersonal psychology and science of consciousness. I think that the idea that mathematics is an archetypal realm is one that Tegmark and Penrose would both agree to, but they don't really investigate mathematics so much from a full-fledged psychological point of view. And among other things, from his point of view, Mendel posits the existence of a universal consciousness and the thesis of the sentience of matter, based on analogies, essentially, most of all, between mathematics of the quantum wave function, given by the Schrödinger equation, which is the foundation of quantum mechanics, and personal, transpersonal, and archetypal psychological processes. And he actually goes into some considerable mathematical detail, especially in the appendix to Quantum Mind, about the analogies, uncanny analogies between the wave function and the phenomenology of different psychological processes, especially of reflection and self-reflection. I'm not actually going to go into that here. I would recommend people to Quantum Mind. It's actually quite fascinating, but beyond the time and scope that I have right now. However, I want to end with the possibility that actually the existence of a universal consciousness and the sentience of matter follow necessarily from the conjunction of the non-computability of thought, conscious thought, and the mathematical universe hypothesis. Now that's a whole another thesis and argument ultimately in itself, which I initially hope to present here, but I realize it's really beyond the scope and beyond the time. To be continued, I promise. I leave that as a bit of a teaser. The basic idea is that if everything is mathematical, and mathematics is in some way intrinsically bound up with consciousness, then somehow the entire physical universe, if the entire physical universe is identical with the entire mathematical universe, must reflect and contain a universal consciousness, and everything in that physical universe must in some way be an expression of the universal consciousness that is itself, in a sense, a conscious entity, since mathematics being intrinsically bound up with consciousness is, in that sense, a kind of universal conception of consciousness, and everything that every aspect of it is one aspect of consciousness. The actual thesis and argument that I've been developing, I think, is, to me, very exciting, and I look forward to presenting that on a future occasion at a time when I feel it is actually fully ripe. But I promise this will be continued one way or another. In the meantime, if you'd like to reach me, my website is www.dreamingalive.net. You can reach me through that. And thank you so much for your attention.
Hello, everybody. I am Goutam Ghosh. I am from Patna, India. I am an independent researcher interested in probing the deeper layers of reality as described in Vedanta and correlating them with the findings of science. My topic for the presentation is a four-layered cosmopsychist model of reality based on Vedanta for deriving materiality from consciousness, solving the reverse hard problem. The presentation is divided into 4 sections: introduction, description, application, and conclusion. We all know what the hard problem is. How can a physical brain give rise to experiences? We have yet to find a satisfactory physical theory. For solving the problem, deeper layers of reality apart from matter are being explored. David Chalmers had added an extra ingredient to the physical, the experience. Roger Penrose's 3 worlds has the physical world, mental world, and the Platonic world of mathematical forms. Penrose Hameroff's Orq-War model adds the proto-consciousness with the 3 worlds of Penrose. Donald Hoffman uses the conscious agent. For Philip Goff, the fundamental mind and the fundamental agent is the intrinsic nature of the contingent physical universe. Explorations are continuing, however. Solution based on Vedanta. Vedanta philosophy has extensively analyzed the deeper layers of reality. Mandukya Upanishad, one of the most important texts of Vedanta philosophy, has given an outline of a 4-layered Cosmopsychist system of reality. Based on Mandukya Upanishad and correlating and inferring ideas from other Vedantic texts, a structured 4-layered Cosmopsychist model of reality is presented here. The model, along with other applications, provides a framework for deriving materiality from consciousness, a solution to the reverse heart problem. It's a very simplified picture of the model. The first layer is the fundamental layer and covers the second, third, and fourth layers. The second layer covers the third and fourth, and the third layer covers the fourth. First layer is the universal consciousness called Brahm in Vedanta. Words in italics are the Vedantic terms. The qualities of universal consciousness are beingness, consciousness, bliss, supreme self, the innermost core or substrate of every self. It's a plenum, complete in itself, perfectly undifferentiated. It's infinite and eternal, beyond space, time, and causation. It is both transcendental as well as immanent. The second layer. The universal consciousness in its immanent and creative aspect changes into a universal conscious agent and its field. The field has three components: intelligence stuff or sattva, energy or rajas, inertia or tamas. The process of creation is the process of more and more differentiation of the perfectly undifferentiated first layer. The three components have been described here. Intelligence stuff is the medium of reflection of intelligence, the essence of the form that has to be realized. Energy or rajas is the tendency to do work. Inertia or tamas is the obstacle to energy for doing work. They are compared to the three strands of a rope. They are always interacting. One or the other component prevail, and new forms, mental as well as physical, cosmic as well as individual, are created. This is the complete table showing the creation process resulting from the interactions of the three components. You can see the 4 layers and 4 different colors. This is the first layer, this is the second layer, this is the blue one, third layer, and the green one is the fourth layer. We have seen that the first layer of universal consciousness changes into UCA and its field. The field consists of 3 interacting components. These are the 3 interacting components. They are always interacting. When the inertial component is predominant, the 5 subtle elements are created. The 3 components reappear in the subtle elements and continue interacting. Here the 3 components reappear in the subtle elements again. And while interacting, when the intelligence component is predominant, the cosmic mind and the individual mind are created. The predominance of energy or rajas component create the actual energies here. The predominance of the inertial component projects the physical world or the 4th layer. Finally, we have the blue arrow. It represents the universal consciousness getting limited and becoming individual conscious agent attaching with the mind. We will explain them in next slide. The subtle elements constitute the basic ground on which third and fourth layers are built up. Each element is in a specific vibrational state. Each element is potential sense stimuli or proto-sense stimuli. Subtle elements are 5 in number, related to each sense: the sound, touch, sight, smell, and taste. The cosmic structure at the third layer is called Hiranyagarbha in Vedanta, and it is a combination of cosmic mind and cosmic energy. Cosmic mind of Hiranyagarbha is stated to be the holder of cosmic blueprint or the ideation of the universe. Very briefly, the process of creation of individual conscious agent is described here. It is called Jiva in Sanskrit. The field of UCA has projection as well as veiling powers. We have seen how the field of UCA projects the various forms through the interactions of the three components. The veiling power limits the universal consciousness, and individual conscious agent is created having the subtle and the gross body. Functions of the ICA are knowledge, will, and activity. Now we describe the fourth layer. Origination of materiality involves the three layers: the second layer, the first, third layer, and the fourth layer. The three components of the UCA field interact, and while inertia is predominant, the subtle elements are created. The three components of the subtle elements interact, and while inertia or tamas is predominant, the gross elements, 5 in number, and the physical world are created. The more the inertial component gets predominance, evolution proceeds more to the grosser forms. It is an interesting formula for creation of gross elements from subtle ones and is called the Panchikarana process. Gross element 1 is created when half of subtle element 1 is added up with 1/8 of subtle element 2, 3, 4, and 5. Similar equations for other elements are derived. Might there be the different harmonics of vibrations of the underlying fields? These are the 5 subtle elements. The proto-sense stimuli they are linked with, and the gross elements they create. It's a very detailed process, and we will not go into the details. But the gross elements correspond to the various stages of cosmic evolution as per the current understanding of science, especially the Big Bang. Now we move to our third section, the applications of this model. The first application is the solution to the reverse hard problem. For this, I have recalled here the complete creation table again. We have already solved the reverse hard problem, that is deducing materiality of the fourth layer from universal consciousness of the first layer. The first layer of universal consciousness is transformed into the universal conscious agent and the field of UCA. The field components interact, and while inertia is predominant, subtle elements are created. Again, the three components continue interact. The intelligent stuff, while predominant, create the cosmic mind, the individual mind. When the energy component is predominant, cosmic energy and the vital energies are created. When the inertial component is predominant, the 5 gross elements are created. The universal consciousness also gets limited, shown here by the blue line, and becomes individual conscious agent, and attaching with the limited mind perceives the projected world. The second application is the model's similarities with the deeper layers and structures of some prominent theories of consciousness. David Chalmers' 2 layers correspond here with the 4-layer model. Penrose's 3-world formula correspond to the 3 component here. Penrose's concept of aesthetics or beauty correspond with the bliss aspect here. Penrose Hameroff's OR also has the equivalences except proto-consciousness. OR uses proto-consciousness as something which lacks cognition and meaning, but in 4-layered model, the consciousness is a plenum, complete in itself. Comparing with Hoffman's model, the similarities with the 4-layered model are consciousness is fundamental matter derivative in both. Perception hides reality. Conscious agent perceives, decides, acts. Dissimilarities, the interactions of conscious agents create the experience, but in 4-layered model, interactions of the 3 components, intelligence, stuff, energy, and inertia, create the experienced forms. Comparing with Philip Goff's model, in Philip Goff's model, the fundamental mind or the fundamental agent is the intrinsic nature of the physical world. In 4-layered model, cosmic mind encompasses the physical world, and the universal conscious agent and its field encompasses the cosmic mind. Both the UCA and cosmic mind have agentic functions. This is the third application. Some of the inherent processes of this model are in consonance with the existing laws of nature. Further research can be taken up on these issues. First one is the unified theory. In physics, we are trying to find a unified theory involving matter, energy, space-time. But universal consciousness with its pure subjectivity of beingness, consciousness, bliss, from which emerge the creative components of inertia or tamas, energy or rajas, intelligence, stuff or sattva, could be the unifying ground for a common theory involving both subjectivity and objectivity. The vibrations and interactions of the 3 components, the intelligence, stuff, energy, and inertia, create the subtle elements, cosmic mind, individual mind, and the physical world. These processes are similar to string vibrations, creating different forms. Vibrational subtle elements are similar to the quantum fields. The stages of cosmological evolution based on subtle elements and gross elements resemble the process of Big Bang, specifically the cyclic Big Bang. The energy and inertia components in the 2nd layer, which create the subtle elements of the 3rd layer, and then the gross elements of the 4th layer, may correspond to the dark energy and dark matter. Etymologically, the word Maya is associated with the process of measurement, and through this process of measurement, the infinite is confined into finite and manifold. I and this are separated, things excluded from one another. As a conclusion, we can say that the model presents an integrated picture of consciousness, mind, and matter. The model provides a framework for deriving materiality from consciousness. It has similarities with some of the layer structures of some prominent theories of consciousness based on panpsychism, cosmopsychism. Some of the inherent processes of this model are in consonance with existing laws of nature. This slide ends my presentation. List of a few references. You can pause the presentation to view them. Thank you. You can contact me at my primary email, goutam1000@yahoo.com. Thank you again.
The Imaginal world is a name coined by Henry Corbin to indicate that this world is more than fantasy. It is a real world of powerful images to which the mind can have access. It is the world between sense and abstraction, looking upward to pure abstract forms and downward to material reality. Aristotle claimed that all thought involves images, and the idea itself is much older, tracing, at least in application, to the magical civilizations of the Bronze Age and earlier into ancient shamanism. Today it is expressed by Popper, Eccles, Penrose, and others. This table shows the slightly different ways that people have looked at the relationship between the material world, the world of the mind, or the imaginal world, and the world of pure forms. I'm just going to use the generic terms material world, world of mind or imaginal world, and world of forms. Corbin defines the imaginal world as the bridge or mediator between the pure intellect and the material sensory world. This idea is found in multiple sources, at least as far back as Plato, who held that mathematics was a bridge to the world of forms, as in a mathematician using the sketch of a triangle to prove abstract theorems about all triangles. Mathematics is a good example. A mathematician looks at a representative symbol, an image, but sees in intuition the abstract mathematical object represented and knows the constraints and conditions implied. About 100 years ago, the mathematician David Hilbert wrote that the objects of mathematical intuition are the concrete signs themselves, whose shape, according to the conception we have adopted, is immediately clear and recognizable. In the imaginal world, sensible forms are immaterialized and intellectual forms are imaginalized, that is, given shape, qualities, and dimensions. This mediating role imposes strict conditions to prevent images produced from degrading into unreal fantasies. Material images are representations of imaginal images, which are representative of abstract concepts, ideas, states, and energies. The medieval Sufi mystic Ibn Arabi held that the imaginal world is a channel of creative illumination from the divine world to the imaginal world, and through the craftsmanship required to produce material forms, to the sensory world. The imaginal is what the poet, artist, musician, architect, flower arranger, inspired chef, philosopher, and all creative individuals seek to make real, pointing to something beyond. Without discipline, imagination falls into fantasies controlled by fears and desires. The result can be as innocent as a daydream or as destructive as genocide. There is always danger. The imaginary can be innocuous. The imaginal never can be so. Many Jungians identify the entities existing in the imaginal world with the archetypes. Archetypal images are seen as qualitative forms that provide channels for pure energies. The imaginal world, however, can be far more mundane than this would suggest. Memory palaces are imaginal technology, as is the use of physical images to represent abstract realities. For example, the Statue of Liberty is a representation of liberty. Any material representation of a cultural idea is an aspect of the imaginal world, even a MAGA hat. Culture is expressed in the worldviews of culture bearers in terms of images that express cultural ideals. When discussing sensory impressions and images, the default is vision, but there are multiple channels of sensation with associated images, including not only the usual senses, but gesture, motor schemes, and kinesthetic sensations. These provide the scaffolding for the theater of the imaginal world, with props and actors dressed in qualia. Keith Devlin, in his book The Math Gene, classified 4 levels of abstraction: short-term projections of motion, recollection of hidden objects, combinatorial play with elements of sensation, including separation of properties from objects, and finally, pure abstract thought. It's the 3rd level trait that allows imaginal constructions. When the brain constructs a perception, it collects sensory inputs together with elements from memory using innate structural forms. This collection is distinguished as a thing and named in the context of an established anchoring framework of beliefs and culture-laden assumptions. Hearing a word evokes images linking the word with meaning. To quote G. Spencer Brown, "There can be no distinction without motivation, and no motivation unless contents are seen to differ in value. Thus, the calling of the name can be identified with the value of the content." Imagination produces value-laden images that excite the affections and emotions. Imaginal images can seem more real than real. That is the power and the danger of the imaginal world. Advertising executives and public opinion manipulators are well aware of the power of the imagination. Images are used to associate a product with satisfaction of an instinctual need, even if it has no real relation to that need. In analogy, humans have a sweet tooth. There are evolutionary reasons for this. The sweetness of a fruit is an indication that it is ripe, can be digested, and a complex of essential nutrients is available in a tasty package. Sugar is what we get when the sweetening factor is extracted and other nutritional elements discarded. Sugar is used to sweeten foods having little or no real nutritional value. The evolutionary attraction is used to sell something stripped of the elements that gave the original evolutionary advantage. Imagination, through its function in accessing the imaginal world, fills a range of roles, including understanding other minds, performing and recognizing pretense, driving the arts and creative thinking, gaining knowledge of possibilities, and interpreting metaphor or figurative language. Running wild, it is a major element in psychopathology. The easiest example, going back to Plato again, is mathematics. The images and diagrams used by mathematicians to help in conceptualizing abstract mathematical forms. The imaginal world is the realm of ritual magic, theurgy, religious ritual, and the use of icons, yantras, and mandalas. In systems such as Tibetan Buddhism, the goal is to achieve recognition of absolute mind and the impermanence of relative appearances. The mandala images act to potentiate a higher form or state. There are books of correspondences and libraries of images that, in connection with other practices, can take people through a series of imaginal stages to particular states of consciousness. Each image acts to organize a state and point the practitioner to the abstract reality of that state. The idea is to internalize the symbolized states, using form to go beyond form. The first step is to experience a state. The second is to learn how to get back to the state. And the third is to learn how to stabilize it. The inner world we each inhabit is an imaginal projection. We experience a phenomenal world and, amazingly, can agree on many of its features. So we forget it's a construct of the mind. As Nicholas of Cusa wrote, there is something beyond. The mind's thinking contains what neither sensation nor reason grasp, that is, the prime image and the incommunicable truth of forms that shine in sensible things.
I'm Fred Schiffer, and I'm going to speak on consciousness and good and evil. The main purpose of this talk is to propose in 20 minutes a novel approach to ethics, one that is based in neuroscience, clinical psychiatry, and the science of consciousness. We have testable hypotheses supported by empirical data from blind, randomized, sham-controlled trials. We think of consciousness as valuable, and the thought of an inevitable human extinction and the consequent loss of human consciousness as profoundly tragic. Art, science, culture, and their associated feelings of joy and well-being exist only as a product of conscious experience, and such experiences are almost universally regarded as a good. Consciousness also enhances actions, and those actions that result in well-being for the individual and his group are regarded as a good. So consciousness is often considered a great good for the furtherance of well-being. But human consciousness can also bring great harm and suffering. Group membership increases with empathy, but is arbitrary and involves perceptions of others as friend versus enemy. Evil is an attack on one's well-being by a human conscious intentional act by another person and or group, or by a part of oneself. Good is an enhancement of one's well-being by a human conscious intentional act by another person and or group, or by oneself. Causing harm to an evil group can be seen as a good. Whether something is good or evil may depend on your group affiliation. Inclusiveness of the group depends on the balance between cooperativeness and competitiveness. Lions and hyenas are natural enemies and viciously kill one another. Is one good and one evil? Stalin is reputed to have murdered at least 20 million people. He controlled the Soviet Union through terror, torture, and murder. Yet many Russians revered him. So was he evil? Churchill led England to victory in the Second World War, as did Stalin. Yet he was a white racist who supported colonial atrocities. So was he good? Deciding on the boundaries between good and evil has been a great challenge for philosophers. Perhaps we need a new approach to the problem of ethics. I propose a novel approach to morality. In my work as a psychiatrist, I've written over decades that most people are of two minds, one that is more mature and wiser, and one that is more childlike and neurotic because of childhood traumas, and that each personality is associated with one of the two brain hemispheres. This is based on my clinical observations and on the split brain studies. We have published 13 experiments in support of the hypothesis. And we've used the goggles that you see in the left side on the top. And underneath that is a diagram of the connection between the visual fields and the contralateral hemisphere. In the middle is an fMRI study that we published. We had 7 people from our lab go into the scanner with the goggles, and when they looked out the left visual field, the right hemisphere lit up relative to their left, and vice versa when they looked out the right visual field. We performed 2 RTMS studies. In the first, we had patients try on the goggles, and if they felt better when they looked out the right visual field, it meant that their left hemisphere was positive. And if they felt worse out the right visual field, we predicted that they wouldn't do well. And the results showed that See if I can. So the results showed that here these people were predicted to do poorly, and a 20% decrease in, this is the Hamilton Depression score, is considered very poor. And most of these people did very poorly. There was one exception. It was a left-handed woman who did pretty well. All of the people who did well below 50% is considered quite well. Were all predicted by the goggles to do well. And this was replicated with almost identical results with a RTMS clinic in Canada. Both were published. The troubled side of a person can not only inflict harm on other people, but it also can consciously do harm to itself or oneself. In masochistic or suicidal behavior, part of oneself can be seen as an outside group. At times, a part of oneself can attack another part of oneself. A person's personality can be an interplay between the mature and the immature the immature hemisphere. This person has two minds that can compete for dominance. This photograph is a composite of two photographs, and we see that there can be a competition between the two personalities within this person, and some mornings they may wake up and be quite a nasty sadist, and other days can wake up and be very pleasant, that these two sides can compete with each other or cooperate, and psychotherapy often entails working with the more negative side and trying to get the positive side to help in that endeavor. We have developed a way to stimulate one hemisphere or the other and dramatically change a person's personality with a superluminous LED over the positive hemisphere. And we can stop conscious, overwhelming drug cravings, stop conscious feelings of anxiety and depression, stop conscious destructive behavior. Often the troubled side, which can be associated with the left or right brain, it's about 50-50, will dominate, and the patient will engage in destructive behaviors such as gambling, drug abuse, or gratuitous violence. Studies by our group have demonstrated that unilateral transcranial biophotomodulation, or this LED, can activate either hemisphere by placing it over the forehead on one side or the other. And we can bring out the mind associated with that hemisphere with its healthy or neurotic mental properties. And on the right you see a photograph of the LED. We have been issued 2 method patents proposing that to enhance a person's well-being, one should determine which hemisphere has a positive valence, as we do with the goggles, and we have a new computer test, and then stimulate that hemisphere with a 4-minute unilateral LED treatment on the side of the forehead over that hemisphere. If I put the light over the negative hemisphere, I bring out the negative personality, and the person is apt to develop drug cravings or gambling urges, and he'll see me as hostile as his mother was, and I look different on the other side. This is a fictional person to make a point, again, that there can be an interplay between the mature and the immature hemisphere. And so here we have actually two different people, but we're just going to pretend that they're different personalities within the same individual. The same person, but with more of the immature side, is becoming more dominant. In this state, he is more likely to consciously engage in sadistic, illegal, destructive behaviors. This is evil. The same person, but more of the mature side, is becoming more dominant. In this state, he is more likely to consciously engage in compassionate, productive, inclusive, legal behaviors. This is good. So we did a pilot study in 2009 at MGH, and we found that when the light was on, there was an increase in blood flow in the brain compared to when the light was off. This is a Hamilton Depression Rating Scale scores after one treatment. 2 weeks later, there was a marked decrease from looks like 24 down to 10.65, and then at 4 weeks it started to come back up, but not to where it had been. We have completed 2 blind placebo-controlled studies whose main aim was to use this method to reduce opioid cravings. The first had 17 patients come in for 3 sessions. The first and second were randomized to either sham or active treatments, and the third was a follow-up. And what we found was that after the active treatment, a week later, there was a 55% drop in opioid cravings. After the sham treatment in the same individuals, there was a 17.6% drop, and this was highly significant. We published this in Frontiers in Psychiatry. And in the same paper, we pointed out that the Hamilton Depression Rating Scale decreased very little in the sham after the sham treatment, but decreased from 15 down to 8.8, which was significantly was a significantly greater decrease than the sham, and was highly significant. There was a 42% reduction in Hamilton. There was a significant reduction in cravings when the positive hemisphere was treated than when the negative hemisphere was treated with the active treatment. This difference during the sham treatment was not significant. So if we had the light on, we could activate the 2 hemispheres and get different craving scores. In the placebo, with the placebo treatment, we didn't get a significant difference. In a second study of 40 patients with opioid cravings, which is in progress with 31 completed, half received the active treatment to the positive hemisphere and half received sham. The study was funded by NIDA in an SBIR grant, and 66% of the study was done by Mindlight, and 33% was done by McLean. Patients received active or sham treatments for twice a week for 4 weeks, and then had 3 weekly follow-up sessions. This is the raw data, and with the raw data, there was a 76% decrease in cravings from the beginning, and you can see it's a downward trending curve as they get treated over the 4 weeks. The sham group was more horizontal and didn't. It had a decrease of 28%. This was highly significant and had a high effect size. We did a mixed model analysis, and it had an effect size of 1.9. If the conscious mind associated with the negative hemisphere, it is prone to harmful experiences such as anxiety, depression, and rage, and actions such as gambling, drug abuse, and sadistic violence, then the negative hemisphere generally, as a result of traumas, is prone to evil. When the conscious mind of the negative hemisphere dominates, the person is prone to be immature, less intelligent, more prone to deep anxiety, and less inclusive and empathic. These mental states are prone to evil insofar as they are prone to gratuitous harm to oneself and others. Goebbels, Trump, and a school shooter. Consciousness can promote wisdom, well-being, culture, and compassion, but it also can promote ignorant, foolish, destructive actions that lead to failed lives and failed societies, and hasten the extinction, the ultimate evolutionary failure of conscious life. A dominant negative hemisphere tends not to want to give up its dominance, even when the person is suffering despair and acting destructively. Life is concerned with the sustenance of life in whatever form it finds itself. Any form of life strives urgently to survive, even at the expense of competing, possibly superior life forms, as we see with lions and hyenas. Life forms that I might consider evil still strive to flourish. Life is not concerned with morality, meaning, culture, intelligence, quality of experiences, except when they serve this drive to sustain its life form. Consciousness exists because it confers an advantage to sustain life, regardless of whether consciousness supports good or whether it supports evil. Coronaviruses, mosquitoes, and evil individuals serve only their own interests and may prove to be the fittest forms of life to survive. Although evolution lacks morality, consciousness, a discovery of evolution, offers us a noble duty, a moral imperative, to struggle to promote the healthier minds within and among us. And here are some people that I think represent good. Thank you. Here are some references. One in Medical Hypotheses last year on the physical nature of subjective experience, and in Frontiers in Psychiatry, we published a novel treatment of opiate cravings. And here's my contact information. F. Schiffer at mclean.harvard.edu.
Hello, everyone. In advance, I want to say sorry because of the noise and the illumination and all this kind of stuff that present when you are working from your home. Well, I am Daniela Munoz-Jimenez. I am from Mexico City, and I'm also the CEO of CIFRO. CIFRO is the Center of Frontier Research and Philosophy. I will talk about consciousness and life, these beautiful concepts. And this is my talk, From Fundamental Forces to Fundamental Meanings, Consciousness and Life. Well, as is well known, the universe has been evolved from the very beginning, and this evolution has always been driven by fundamental forces. Which kind of fundamental forces? Well, not these kind of forces, of course, but these forces. As is well known, there are 5 forces currently: strong force, weak force, electromagnetic force, and gravity. And recently accepted as a force the Higgs interaction. And well, from the very beginning, the universe has evolved from just energy to some kind of particles, to atoms, and then compounds, then some structures, to, of course, planets, stars, then galaxies and groups of galaxies, etc., etc. Till now, till something called life. Here, 4 or 5 more or less billion years ago, life began to exist, and began to exist because these forces ruled the behavior of the mass in order to create life. That kind of noise, I want to say sorry. Please, sorry for the noise. Well, let's continue. So, as I was saying, life began to exist because of these forces, because life is a result of the evolution of mass driven by these forces. And also, the evolution of life has as well as the entire mass of the universe has been ruled or driven by these forces. It's well known that electromagnetic force and weak force and strong force interact and influence directly the DNA, and these interactions secondarily makes that the DNA transforms itself in some other kind of DNA, or more colloquially said, these forces makes that DNA evolved. So the evolution of life is also ruled by these forces. Therefore, the intelligence of human beings and also consciousness are results of these forces that interact through DNA to create somehow self-awareness of the mass. Meanings, very complex and inextricable meanings like life, of course, and consciousness, but also the meanings of good, benevolence, evil, ethics, morality, etc., etc. So now we understand in theoretical biology and theoretical neuroscience and theoretical, of course, genetics, we understand the DNA as a beep. What is a beep? Beep is the biological information port, because we understand the DNA as a port for these forces of the universe. We know that these forces are carrying, of course, also information, because information, mass, and energy are ruled as well by fundamental principles like the conservation laws. So these forces are carrying many kind of information. There are not just one information, and this information pass through DNA, through these forces, and this information is translated thanks to the DNA and the organisms that are alive into, sorry, there are many issues in my screen. Well, as I was saying, sorry for the inconvenience, these forces driven and carrying information through DNA. This information becomes something physical in the entities alive. It's almost impossible to record because of the noise. I feel embarrassed. Please, sorry. I will try to continue. Well, as I was saying, these forces through the DNA turns into inextricable forms, and these forces take life to this point, to the point of creating something self-aware, something with consciousness. These forces, these fundamental forces, transform mass, transform the particles and subparticles into this, something alive, something that is self-aware of itself, something with consciousness, something that can also speak about itself and question about itself. Sorry, something that is questioning about itself, creating concepts, inextricable concepts like, as I said, morality, ethics, good, evil, benevolence, for example. So, there is a huge problem with this paradigm, because conservation laws argues that mass, energy and information cannot be created and cannot be destroyed. And if we take as a true argument that life began to exist from mass, information and energy, and also consciousness is created from mass, energy and information, such as Tononi theory of information, integration of information of Tononi theory. If that's true, and if also conservation laws is true, there is a paradox, an important paradox that we have to talk about. For example, if mass and energy and information cannot be created nor destroyed, life that is created from mass and information of and energy, how can life begin to exist if life is made of energy, information and mass, and these three things cannot be created nor destroyed? This is a paradox, and let me talk about this paradox. The first paradox is the paradox of Tononi, and the Tononi is the following paradox. If consciousness is made of information, but information cannot be created nor destroyed, how consciousness can begin to exist if the information that is made of cannot be created nor destroyed? So what I'm trying to say with this first paradox is that if consciousness is made of information, how can consciousness begin to exist if anything made of information can be created or destroyed? This is a huge paradox. And the following paradox, the paradox of Bolidrum, is linked or related with free will and volition or agency. Bolidrum is the unification of volition and free will or agency. It's a kind of translation in Spanish, Bolidrum, volition and free will. And the paradox is the following. If through consciousness decisions are made, and if we could decide to be unconscious, at the moment of being unconscious, how can we could decide to return of some state of conscious awareness or self-awareness? This is a paradox, a very, very interesting paradox. Let me read the paradox of Polytrium. Is the following: if decisions were made through consciousness, and if we were decided not to be conscious, would be impossible to decide to become aware again due to the lack of consciousness by which decisions are made. The third paradox is the following, and is the most important, the paradox of the main impossibility, and is the paradox that I was talking previously. If consciousness lies in alive entities, and life is made of mass, energy, and information, and also consciousness is made of information, according to Tononi, that this theory is questioned by this paradox, the paradox of Tononi. But, well, if consciousness and life are made of mass, information, and energy, but nothing made from mass, energy, and information can be created nor destroyed, because mass, energy, and information cannot be created nor destroyed, then how life and consciousness began to exist? This is the main impossibility paradox, and is the paradox that I want to talk about deeply, because this paradox takes us to talk about the ontology of consciousness and life. The next question that we have to make is, what is the ontology of consciousness, and what is the ontology of life if nothing made of mass and energy and information can be created nor destroyed? It means that life and consciousness are made of something completely different from these things. But there is a question. There is a question more important than the ontology. With these paradoxes, we can argue or begin to think that perhaps the ontology of consciousness and life is not neither mass, nor energy, nor information, but something different. However, there is a bigger question. There is a more important question: the teleology. Teleology talks about the purpose of the things. What is the purpose of life in the universe? What's the purpose of the existence of life, and then the existence of life with self-awareness? Why does the universe want to create life, and life with consciousness? I'm talking about that the universe wants to create life and wants to create consciousness, because the forces that rules the universe through the evolution of these forces, life and consciousness exist. Thanks to these forces, life and consciousness exist. But what's the purpose of these things? What's the purpose of the existence of life and consciousness? This is the teleology. And here we have to repeat the questions of the beginning of this little talk. what's the purpose of the existence in the universe of these fundamental meanings like moral, ethics, love, good, benevolence, technology, of course. What's the purpose of the existence of technology, for example, and love and ethics and benevolence in the universe? We have to take something very, very important, and it's this little word, that countermeasure. Perhaps life and consciousness acts as a countermeasure of entropy and thermodynamic laws. As is well known, universe at some point will die. They're very well known as thermodynamic death. This thermodynamic death is the maximum point of entropy, or the maximum point of chaos. This point is a moment in the universe that the measurement of the universe is completely impossible because of the increasing of chaos all over the universe. The maximum point of entropy. However, life seems to be completely antithetical to entropy and completely antithetical to chaos, because seems like life is very, very, very well organized and very, very, very well taxonomized, and there is no place for chaos in life and consciousness, because everything is very, very well built and constructed and perfectly arranged. Seems like if consciousness and life has emerged as a countermeasure of entropy and thermodynamical laws, just like if the universe, through its forces, attempt to avoid its own death. Because imagine that this life, that the evolution of life and consciousness began and expands through all the universe, all over the universe. Literally, the perfectly arranged of life and consciousness, the lack of chaos in consciousness and life countermeasure what happens in thermodynamical laws. And here is the main question of this talk, this quite brief talk. Could life and consciousness, its teleology, its purpose, could be a countermeasure of entropy and thermodynamical laws in order to make the universe alive, and in order to avoid the thermodynamical death? Of course, please take this question as the beginning of our talk, because this little 20-minute talk is about giving the background in order to talk in the question time, in the reply time. So I know there are many questions, there are many doubts, there are many perhaps many skepticism, but please take this like or as a background in order to explain better this hypothesis we have. Just take into account that life and consciousness, its ontology, cannot be mass and energy and information because of these paradoxes. Because how could life and consciousness could begin to exist if are made of things that cannot be created nor destroyed? this is the main paradox that we have to take as a starting point, because if we accept that the ontology of life and consciousness is different from the ontology of the rest of the universe, we have to talk about, or we have to begin to ask about the teleology of consciousness and purpose. The consciousness and life. What's its purpose in the universe? And we strongly believe that consciousness and life, its purpose is to function as a countermeasure in order to avoid the thermodynamical death, because life and consciousness are a process completely contrary to entropy, through several different processes, of course. The explanation of this is very, very complex and is not possible to explain it in 20 minutes talk. So yes, what we think that we have to talk about these days is not about the ontology of consciousness, but because perhaps its ontology cannot be discovered, because everything is made of everything that we know is made of mass, energy, and information, except consciousness. Perhaps consciousness can only explain itself through phenomenology, through the self-experience of the self-awareness. So perhaps the right question is not what is consciousness. Perhaps the right question is, what is consciousness for? What is its purpose? What is the teleology of consciousness? We strongly believe that consciousness, its purpose is to function as a countermeasure of these thermodynamical processes. Well, this is my QR. This is where you can find my information if you want to talk about this topic. And please, let's begin with the questions. I will love it.